Hi guys, TopFM here, and today I'm making a video in collaboration with FM Scouts. Today I'll be showing you how to find really talented regens before the big clubs or sharks get to them and steal them away from you. So today I'll be showing you 3 different tips, but before we get into those, I just want to add a little disclaimer to the video. Obviously, there are lots of ways of finding regens. I find these are the best 3 ways for me personally. There's no one guaranteed way to make sure you get all the best regens every single year. You've just got to put the time in, put the effort in and find these players, and you've got to have a little bit of luck to go with it. But despite me saying that, there is a lot. These are what I believe to be the 3 best ways of finding regens in Football Manager 2015. Using methods that you may not have thought of yourself, but I feel like are some of the best methods you can possibly use for this year's game. So let's get right into this now with the first tip of the episode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list them all out first, and then you'll see them in action. So tip number 1 is the Regen Day filtering and scouting tip. So what you'll be doing in this one, when Regen Day occurs, you'll just be going into your scouting list, filtering it by players who are aged 15 and under, and you'll be going through the list, just offering them pre-contracts before they've been offered contracts by their parent clubs. A bit hit and miss. You won't be able to scout these players, so it will be by chance, but you can steal some players away from really good, talented academies and make them your own. And I'll also show you quickly what sort of scouting setup you should have for your team. Tip number 2, to look through clubs with good youth facilities. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a list of clubs on your screen before you see that tip. It's a list of clubs which has been filtered in the FM editor by best youth recruitment, and they're the sort of clubs you want to look through. A lot of them are quite unknown as well, so look through those clubs and you can find some really talented players that you're actually able to scout as well, and they have a lot of good players in there, and you can find some really hidden gems that your scouts would never have picked up on because they'll be from some very obscure countries some of the time. So it's a way people may not have thought of doing, but there are some big clubs and some smaller clubs out there with good facilities in their country, such as ASEC from Ivory Coast, very good youth recruitment. Tip number 3, look through national teams. So this tip is very simple. What you'll be doing, you'll be selecting a national team, for example Algeria, organising their senior squad list by age, looking for young players with lots of caps for the first team. You're going to be hitting the down arrow next to the country's name, going for every single country, looking for players who are young and have caps for a national team, and then you can go on to scout them, and if they're good you can go on to sign them. It takes a little bit of time, that one, but it's well worth doing. So let's get into the main video now with tip number 1. Okay lads, so here is tip 1, which is the Regen Day and Scouting tip. What we'll be doing in this section of the video is we're going to be going into our scouting screen on Regen Day. Now it's worth bearing in mind that Regen Days do vary depending on the country you're in. In England it does happen to be early March. It will vary what day in March it is every single year in your save. So I'm not sure what all the different days are, so you're going to have to check that when Regen Day does occur, because this tip is only valid on Regen Days. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going into our scouting page on Football Manager, and you're going to be filtering players by a maximum age of 15 or 16. The best way to do this is 15 years old. If you do it at 16 years old, it's likely that you're going to get players from last year's youth intake appear in your search results. And if that happens, obviously they're not going to be on pre-contracts, and you're not going to be able to sign them very cheaply. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that with 15-year-olds, you've got to get them on Regen Day. You have to be quick. You haven't got time to scout these players. The best way of kind of getting an indication of their ability is to filter them via value. So the ones with the higher values, if you've got a 15-year-old worth 1.5 million on your scouting list, the likelihood is he's going to be a good prospect for the future. So you're going to want to go in there. If you're a smaller club, or even if you are quite a large club, the players won't always want to sign for you. Like this lad from Chelsea up the top here, he's likely to reject me just because he's at Chelsea and he's only just signed there. So this method is a little bit hit and miss in that aspect. But what you've got to bear in mind is that you've got to be constantly looking every region day. If you want to look up other nations' region days and then scout through their young players, it's well worth doing. To do that though, you're going to have to be scouting countries constantly. So what we'll be showing you in just a moment is what sort of scouting setup you should have. But as you can see here, it is that Chelsea player. And just trying to convince him to sign for us. He's not going to this time. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful this region day in finding a good talent who would want to sign. It is all a little bit hit and miss with players like this, especially with this technique. The other two techniques are better, but obviously they're not necessarily going to get me homegrown players. But it does have kind of a higher ratio of finding good talent to signing these good players, because they always want to come to me because of the countries they're currently in. And what we're just showing you here is how to scout for regens. You're going to be setting it for hot prospects. You're going to want to put a scout on there who has really good judging player potential ability. And then you're going to be sending them out for as long as it takes, an ongoing scout report with a minimum potential. Realistically of 3 stars, you can up that to 4, you can up that to 5, but obviously you're going to get less results. So you just want to go and put a really good scout on that, and then you should be able to find the top players in your country, or in any countries in terms of regens. Alright lads, so before we get into the second tip, what you're seeing on your screen now is a list of all the teams in Football Manager 2015 who have the highest youth recruitments in quite a few different countries. Now you may notice there's a couple of big teams we're seeing, such as Borussia Dortmund or Paris Saint-Germain. I've excluded certain teams just because I feel like they're obvious ones you'd look at. As you can see, there's quite a few countries in there. We've got Argentina, we've got Armenia, you've got Ghana, you've got Morocco. All these teams are worth checking every single year just to see if they have a quality player. Now, if they do, scout them, and you'll see, and you'll should be able to sign them before any other teams get in there. You'll see all that happen once we're into the footage. Now, it's also worth bearing in mind that this isn't a definitive list. Feel free to look around all sorts of clubs in all sorts of countries, but these are like the main clubs in terms of their talent and in terms of the youth recruitment systems they have in place in their countries, and they're really the ones more likely to give you good talent and good prospects. So just pause this video now, screenshot this screen, and you can use this list as a reference for any scouting or any regen hunting you may well do. Okay lads, so into the second tip. What we're going to do here, and what you're going to see on camera, is just me going through six or so different teams, just looking to see if they've got any hot prospects and to see if they've got anyone worth us having a look at. Now, the teams we're looking at are ASEC from Ghana, FC, and I apologise for this guy, I'm going to really butcher their name, FC Midtjylland from Denmark, Atromitos from Greece, a Romanian side called UTA Arad, a Uruguayan side called Danubio, and the Toronto FC Academy. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that with these countries, even though Arsenal aren't going to have the best scouting knowledge, you know, they're quite a variety of countries, so if we find any of these players, we're not going to know anything about them. So we're going to whack a scout on each of these players that we do potentially find for a couple of months just to see how good they are. The kind of clubs they're at, they're not going to be picked up by top sides straight away because the clubs aren't exactly that well known. So, as you can see here, straight away, we've seen a young player. He's actually their key player as well. So, we're going to have a look at him. He's 15 years old, and he is he's a left back. So, we're going to have, as we can see, he hasn't played for him yet, and he hasn't got any stats that we can see. So, we're going to chuck our best scout for youth potential on him for a couple of months and see how good he can be. It's always worth doing that with players like this because you know you've got a few months leeway when trying to sign them. Before other clubs do come in for them, because no one's going to have heard of a player like this. So on to the next team, which is FC Midtjylland. As we can see, their hot prospect unfortunately isn't a regen, which doesn't bode well for the players that are regens in their side. As you can see, they have got one, Flemming Sorensen. So we're going to have a scout of him anyway. He's already a little bit older than I'd like. When I find regens, really want to look for 15, 16 year olds. But he could be something, so we're going to chuck a scout on him and see how he goes. Now, as I said, you're not always going to find players at these teams. You're going to go through, if you, for example, if you look through that list, you could find that 50% of them don't even have a player or have a regen there for you to even scout, which is just really the luck of the draw. But the teams you do find regens at, you've got a good chance because of their youth facilities that these regens are going to be good. Now, unfortunately, Andrometos don't have any regens for us to look at this year, so you just move on to the next team, and hopefully the next team will have someone. That next team actually being UTA Arad from Romania, and as we'll just see, no luck there either, no players, so again, we've got to move on to the next team. Now, this team isn't one I've actually heard of. I only found them by looking through the scout reports and the editor data, which is Danubio. They're a Uruguayan side, and as we can see, they've got a really good player here who could be, well, I'd say a really good player. I can't see his stats. He's only 15 though, and we found him just by purely going through the club with good youth facilities. So we're doing that, and we found a player who all these other teams, all these other big clubs in the world will not have even looked at just yet because of the club he's at and because of how young he is. So we could have got first dibs on a very, very exciting prospect here. So we're going to scout him and come back to them at the end of the episode. Finally, we're on to the Toronto FC Academy. It's worth bearing in mind that there are teams out there in the Football Manager that aren't actually like proper football teams. They're more there to develop young players in certain countries. You've got Toronto FC Academy, you've got the US Developmental Academy, you've got one in Ghana, I believe it's the Dare to Dream Academy. I can't exactly remember their name, but they are actually on the list I put at the beginning of this tip. So it's worth checking teams like that because they're sort of out there just to produce good talent in countries that might not always produce a top footballing talent. But yeah, this is always worth doing. So that kind of wraps up tip number 2, and we'll move swiftly on to tip number 3. Okay lads, so on to the third and final tip for this video. This one is going to be scanning through national teams in the game just to try and find any players who are very young and have a lot of caps for their respective national team. So just pick any country you can think of. In this case I'm going to do Ivory Coast. So we're going to search for the Ivory Coast here. Here we go. And we're going to go to their senior squad. Now, once on the senior squad, we're going to put the player's youngest at the top of the squad screen. As you can see, we found the player straight away. So we're going to have a look at him, see if he's any cop, and we're going to scout him because we've got a little bit of leeway of these players as well. Obviously, bearing in mind with this video, I have literally just simulated 3 seasons in. I haven't had 3 seasons worth of me scouting, me doing this every season. So some of these top players like this lad here have been picked up by a better club already. But still, he's not at a world-class club, so we should be able to sign him pretty cheaply anyway. But if you're doing this year in, year out, you won't miss out on players like this. So once you've found players, obviously, you want to hit the scout button. Do it for either 2 or 3 months, just so you can get a really good overview of them, and that way there's less margin for error from your scouts. Arsenal obviously have Steve Rowley. He's got 20 potential and 20 current ability. And what you're going to do is you're going to scout them, and after that you're just going to flick through all the countries in that continent and all the countries you find, and you're going to scout any players that look interesting. As you can see, I'm just scanning through countries now. I've sped this footage up so you don't have to watch me doing it all very, very slowly, and we're going to scout anyone that seems interesting. Now we're going to bring it back to the normal speed here just for this player. He's a Tunisian centre-back, only young, and as you can see, he's already got a couple of caps for the national team. So we're going to scout him as well, and we're also going to just scout a few more players just to see if there's anyone out there worth picking up, just to try and be thorough, because you never know what kind of players you're going to encounter, what kind of players you could miss if you don't scout them. And it's worth doing this for every single continent there is. And at the moment I'm doing Africa, so make sure you do Asia, make sure you do the Americas, make sure you do Europe, and you're bound to find some talented regions that way. So that's that tip done, and I'll come back now for the summary. Okay lads, so we're back for the summary of this video now. What we're going to do here is we're going to look through all the players who we've scouted so far, and we're going to see if their potential ability is actually Premier League quality. I feel like that's a good margin to see whether you found a talented regen or not. If they can make it in the Premier League, they're a good find. As you can see, the first 3 we found here, none of them any good. Only about 2 to 2.5 star potential, so we're not even going to bother looking at them. All the others have 3 star or above, and all of these players have been found using these tips that I found. Unfortunately, obviously the first tip I showed you, the Regen Day one, that is very hit and miss. We're not going to be able to find players like that year in, year out. But you've got 2 other players, 2 other tips to look at here, which we have found, what, 5 decent players of. And it just shows I've spent 10-20 minutes looking for players, and I've already found 5 players who I'd probably sign for my Arsenal team if I was playing this save. Keep them in my under 18s, try and develop them. If nothing else, you're going to make a little bit of profit on them because you can pick these players up cheap. And you know, if they do come good, you've got players who if you find them young enough, they're going to count as homegrown. They're going to get into your first team, and you could have like a world-class left back. For example, the player from Danubio, Ale. If I sign him, I can get him for about 1.5 million. I can develop him. I can get him to first team quality potentially, because as you can see when we go back to the other screen, he has got the potential to be a very good left back, and he can come into the Arsenal first team and stay there for his entire career potentially. So we've got 10 years from 10. Well, he's 15 at the moment. We've got potentially 15 years out of a really good left back, just because we've found him before other clubs using these tips that I've used here, and I'm showing you here. Now it's worth bearing in mind that, as I said, these aren't the only 3 ways of finding regens. There are plenty of ways out there, but I feel like these are the 3 ways you can find them before big clubs find them. Obviously you can just have your scouts set up properly, but if you're scouting, the likelihood is other clubs' scouts are going to find these players as well. So if you do have any other regens or tips for finding regens out there, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm sure everyone would appreciate that if you did so. And but I do feel these are the best ways of finding regens before big clubs do them. Now I'm just looking over Diego Ale here. As you can see, he's got really good potential. He's got the black star potential to be 3.5 stars, which isn't bad for a Premier League left back. If you think of the quality of left backs there are at the beginning of the game, you'd love someone with 3.5 star potential. Now, as we can see, he can play all down the left wing up until left midfield, and he's got some really good stats on him. And I'm just going to put in a bid just to show you how cheaply I can pick him up for 1.5 million. They're happy with that. We can sign him, chuck him in the Arsenal youth team. He's going to develop, get him tutored by a good player, and we're sorted. He's going to develop into a good player, hopefully. And you know, if he doesn't hit quite Arsenal standards, we've signed him for 1.5 million. By the time we're going to look to bring him into the Arsenal team or look to sell him, he's going to be Premier League quality regardless. We could sell him for at least 3, 4, 5 million, and we've made a profit on that player. And you know, we found him before any other clubs would have even looked at him. That's the emphasis of this video, is finding players before big clubs get them. But that really does round up this video, but everyone. What we're going to do is just go let this play out, and you just see me looking over the players we have found. I hope you have enjoyed this video. As I said earlier, if you've got any other tips for finding regens, leave them in the comment section below. I'd also just like to thank FM Scout for giving me the opportunity to make this video for their channel. I hope you'll see a lot of me on this channel in the future. My name is TopFM. Please feel free to check me out, and I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you all next time, lads.